What's your name again? Hi, how are you?
Good evening, everyone. I'm Amy Martin, the Director of the Illinois Historic Preservation Agency. On behalf of Governor Pat Quinn, I'd like to welcome you to the Pullman State Historic Site. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Thank you for that warm welcome. All of us are so glad to be here this evening. All of us care a lot about the future of the Pullman site, and we want to hear more about the exciting possibilities of making this neighborhood part of a national park system. We have several people here available to explain the options. You'll hear from my agency, the National Park Service, and the City of Chicago. You'll also hear from elected officials, including Alderman Beale and Congresswoman Kelly. And then we'll get to the most important part of the evening, you. You'll have a chance to ask questions and voice your opinions. No decisions will be made here tonight. No votes are being taken, but this meeting will give the public and the government more information about the future of this wonderful neighborhood. Before we get started, I should acknowledge a few people and organizations. First, this meeting would not be possible without Mike Wagenbach, the superintendent of the public community. And all his hardworking volunteers. I also want to thank the National Trust for Historic Preservation, the Chicago Neighborhood Initiatives, and the National Park Service, who helped organize tonight's meeting. I also want to thank the National Parks Conservation Association for all the organizing and advocacy work they have done over the past few years. And finally, I want to acknowledge the City of Chicago and the numerous Pullman partners and friends that have provided generous support over the last few years. In addition to the people that you will be hearing from tonight, we have several officials who are deeply involved in Pullman's future. I'd like to just recognize a few people if I could. First off, we have Clarisol Dookie, Chicago Director for Senator Durbin's office, Joe Tennell from Durbin's office, Daniel Bauer from Senator Kirk's office, Sonny Fisher, my board chair for the Illinois Historic Preservation Agency, Justin Kajendos, the Deputy Chief of Staff for Governor Pat Quinn, Michael Howard, who is also the Deputy Director for the Department of Natural Resources, one of our collaborative agencies that we work with, and Alderman Ferretti. So thank you all for joining us. Now, to get things started, I'd like to introduce Alderman Anthony Beale. Alderman Beale is a strong advocate for the Pullman State Historic Site and the entire neighborhood. He's a big part of the reason the idea of a national park is getting so much attention and consideration. Alderman Beale?
Good evening, Pullman. First, let me welcome everyone to the 9th Ward, the future site of number 402 Historic Park in the United States of America. If you are not excited about what's happening in the 9th Ward in the Pullman community, then shame on you. We have so much activity happening in our community right now, thanks to your efforts about keeping the Pullman history alive For over 50 years, some Pullman residents have been working on preserving and just protecting the history of our Pullman community. So you all are the real champions of the future site of 402. Come on, give it up. I just want to go over a few things as far as what this means to our community. First and foremost, this is going to mean between $32 and $35 million a year in annual revenue coming into our community. And so when we look at what this project can bring to our community, we have to do a lot to build our community as far as restaurants. We have to build hotel chains. We have to build all kind of shops, because once this gets out, Pullman is no longer a secret to us. The secret is going to be out for the entire nation to come to our community. And so we have to give them something to come to. We have to make sure that the planning is in place. That's why it's real important, community, now more than ever, that we step up to the plate. Don't sit on the sideline. You need to get in the game, because the community is going to be one that plans as far as what this district is going to look like. So we're going to have numerous meetings. But today we're here to make sure that we let Director Jarvis know to take our words back to the president to say, we want you to sign into law the next historic district as far as the Pullman 402 in our community. I don't want anybody to hold back. I want you all to speak from the heart. Speak from your gut, so he knows exactly that we're not playing with this thing. The community is serious about this designation, and we need to make sure that he goes back to Washington and lets the president know without question that the community is supporting this project. They thought they were going to get about 75 people here today for this meeting. I told them, you better make room for 300 to 400, because the community is going to turn out. All right, you can't cut the Pullman community or the Ninth Ward community short when it comes down to resources coming into our area. So we want to make sure that the community is heard. We want to make sure that everybody understands the magnitude of this project. And also, as we develop our area, we build the shops, we build the stores, we get the designation. We also want to make sure that the metro stations are redone from 103rd, 111th, 115th. We want to make sure that the infrastructure is put in place. We want to change all the lighting in the Pullman district. We want to make sure all the streets are redone, all the sidewalks are redone. All those things are going to happen, because once this thing is designated, we're going to be competing for federal resources to come into our community. So we're going to get a whole lot of icing on this cake. All right? So ladies and gentlemen, I'm extremely excited about where we are today. And so I'm going to turn it over to our next speaker. But I cannot close without saying one last thing. Go Jackie Robinson West. Support them in their endeavors. I could not be more proud of those young men. They're fighting and they're representing us to the highest level. And I want to let everyone know, and all the press know, that there are great things coming out of the south side of Chicago. It's all not negative. So I'm going to get off of my soapbox right now. I'm going to turn it over to our next speaker, but I'm so proud and I'm so happy to be your alderman. And I'm going to let you all know we're going to charge this thing right down to Washington and make it happen. All right, our next speaker is Catherine Shannon from IHPA. She's the Deputy Director. Let's give it up for Shannon.
Thank you, Alderman Beale. Good evening, everyone. My name is Catherine Shannon. I'm the Deputy Director for the Illinois Historic Preservation Agency, and I'm here to give a quick overview of the history of Pullman. Now, I know all of you know Pullman probably far better than me, so I'll keep it short. But I do think it's important important to take a few moments to remember what an amazing place we're talking about. George Pullman founded the Pullman Palace Car Company in 1867 to provide comfortable and elegant cars for rail travel. In the 1880s, he purchased land and built the company town of Pullman for the workers who made rail cars at his factory here. His idea was revolutionary: create an entire community where workers would have good homes, good schools, attractive parks and amenities, with the goal of producing a happy and reliable workforce. He charged workers rent for the housing based on his belief that people did not value things they did not pay for, and with the intent of returning dividends to corporate investors. His vision produced a town of lovely homes and magnificent buildings designed by architect Solon Beeman and beautiful landscapes created by Nathan Barrett. It attracted visitors and praise from around the world, and in its heyday, Pullman was touted as the world's most perfect town. That alone would make this community historic, but there's much more. In 1893, business slumped for the Pullman Palace Car Company. George Pullman responded by cutting jobs and wages, but not cutting rent on workers' company-owned homes. Naturally, workers were outraged. They tried negotiating with Pullman, but got nowhere. They went on strike in 1894, and the American Railway Union organized a nationwide boycott, where union members refused to touch any train that included Pullman cars. This was a new tactic in labor negotiations, and the consequences were significant. The boycott crippled rail traffic across the country. The response was intense and bloody. The federal government worked with railroad companies to justify shutting down the strike and then sent in troops. 30 strikers were killed and dozens more were wounded. The Pullman strike was a defining moment in American labor history, demonstrating the growing power of organized labor. And it is credited with the passage of legislation establishing Labor Day as a national holiday, just days after the Pullman strike ended in 1894. Pullman also played an important role in African American history. The porters he hired to work on his sleeping cars were African American. In the early days, many of them were former slaves. Porters worked hard under dismal working conditions, but they did have stable jobs that allowed them to save money and plan for the future, and they held positions of status and respect in the Black community. That made Pullman porters a building block in creating an African American middle class. Eventually, the porters protested the unfair, racist working conditions. They formed the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, and in 1938, Pullman became the first major corporation to sign a labor agreement with an African American union. The Pullman porters weren't just a force for change in business and working conditions. Under the leadership of A. Phillip Randolph, they were an early and powerful voice for civil rights in all aspects of American life, and they helped bring equality to millions of people. That's why Pullman is historic. Now let's talk about Pullman's recent past. In 1969, the neighborhood was threatened with demolition for an urban renewal project and a light industrial park. Fortunately, Pullman residents and organizations banded together to stop this plan and others that threatened their historic buildings and neighborhood. Pullman Community became a National Historic Landmark in 1970 and a Chicago Landmark District in 1972. And through the effective work of the Pullman Civic Organization, the Historic Pullman Foundation, concerned residents, and other public and private partners, many of Pullman's prominent historic structures have been protected and preserved, and many historic homes have been beautifully restored. Today, more than 95% of the original Pullman homes still stand, and Pullman has been declared one of America's 10 great neighborhoods by the American Planning Association. In 1991, the Illinois Historic Preservation Agency bought the Hotel Florence, the Clock Tower Administration Building, and the factory complex with the intention of converting these buildings into a fully interpreted museum and historic site. Tragically, the clock tower and the south factory wing were heavily damaged in a 1998 fire. The agency then dedicated itself to stabilizing and restoring the clock tower and what was left of the north factory wing, and renovating the Hotel Florence. In all, the Historic Preservation Agency has invested more than $27 million of state and federal funds to preserve and renovate the factory and hotel buildings in Pullman. But due to budget constraints, the state has not had resources to renovate the factory and administration buildings to achieve its goal of a fully interpreted museum. Pullman lives on in the memory of U.S. history for its seminal role in industrial, labor, and African American history, for architecture, urban planning, and landscape design. We are excited by the possibility of working in collaboration with the National Park Service to help Pullman realize its full potential. And now, here's Andrew Mooney, the city's commissioner for the Department of Planning and Development, to talk more about the City of Chicago's vision for Pullman. Commissioner Mooney?
Thank you and good evening. So I met with Director Jarvis, whom we'll hear from later, but I met with him this afternoon, and he said the reason he was here was to see if there was any public support for this designation. I don't think there's any problem about demonstrating that tonight. In fact, it took so long to get in here just to get parking and sit down. David Doig told me as I walked in that he laid out 300 seats. There must be at least 500-600 people here. Congratulations to Pullman. I do want to recognize a couple of people in addition to Director Jarvis. Amy Martin, the Illinois Historic Preservation Agency, Congresswoman Kelly, whom I'll introduce again in a minute, Catherine Shannon, we just heard from. I mentioned David Doig from CNI, Mike Szymanski, I don't know where you're at, Mike, but Mike, where is he? Mike's been lobbying me on this for at least 15 years. Is that right, Mike? Sonny Fisher, good friend, old colleague, old in the sense of years we've worked together, from chairman of the Illinois Historic Preservation Agency, and particularly a colleague of mine at the city, Eleanor Gorski, who heads up our Landmarks and Historic Preservation Agency. And very instrumental in what's happening here in Pullman. I won't go over the history of Pullman, we just heard an outline of it. We did meet with Director Jarvis and the mayor this afternoon. The reason that the director wanted to meet with the mayor was to hear from him personally, whether he and the city and my department and other city agencies were fully in support of this enterprise. Needless to say, the answer was an enthusiastic yes. And as the alderman said, Pullman is on the move. Just look at all the investments that have been made and are being made in this neighborhood these last few years. The new Walmart, the new retail area, the new method factory, the housing, the rehab of housing. We were just down here, was it just a week ago, when we were highlighting the townhome renovations that we and the Attorney General are helping to pay for. All the really good things that are happening in addition to the Jackie Robinson West Fleet in Pullman. There are more than 4,700 jobs in the area today, which is up 10% over where we were last year. There's $225 million in public and private investment going into the neighborhood. These are just statistics, but they're important statistics. Pullman is on the map. Pullman will be on the map, and with this national designation, Pullman will pull away, far away, as we move forward. It's great to be with you tonight. I assure you of the city's full support, the mayor's 100%, 110% support, and we will be eager with you to hear from Director Jarvis. Thank you so much for having me today. Perhaps the most important thing, it is my great pleasure to introduce another person without whom we would not be here tonight. There are many people who've been engaged in pushing this along. I mentioned a few over the years. But at the political level, of course, we have to have their strong support in Congress and at the federal level. Of course, Senator Durbin and Senator Kirk have both been very prominent in pushing this project along. Well, I'm delighted and privileged tonight to introduce someone who, as I say, has been an essential and key character in making sure that we get to this point, and that's our Congresswoman Robin Kelly. Please.
I did want to take the opportunity to recognize Commissioner Deborah Sims, who came in. And also Dr. Lynn Hughes, who was the founder of the A. Phillip Randolph Museum. So thank you for all of that. Today I took some young people on what I would call a civil rights tour, and one of the places we ended up was the A. Phillip Randolph Museum, and Dr. Jarvis came to the museum, and the question was asked, just what is the process? So actually he could stand here and answer and talk about this just as well as I can. But the process is that there are two ways that we can go. One way is legislation, and last January I introduced the Pullman National Historic Park Act to make Pullman National Park, and that was House Resolution 3929. And basically, it does a few things: preserve and interpret for the benefit of future generations the significant labor, industrial, civil rights, and social history of the park, the significant architectural structures in the park, and the role of the Pullman community in the creation of the first national Labor Day holiday in the world. Also, to coordinate preservation and interpretation efforts of the park by the federal government, the state, units of local government, private and nonprofit organizations, and most importantly, the Pullman residents. This includes the coordination of appropriate management for the park. It requires that the Secretary of the Interior work with the state to complete a general management plan for the park within 3 years. So far, my legislation has 37 co-sponsors on it, from sea to shining sea in the United States. Just about everyone in the Illinois delegation has signed on to the legislation, so it is bipartisan, believe it or not. And also, it's not an easy thing these days. And also at the same time that I introduced my bill, Senator Dick Durbin and Mark Kirk also introduced Senate Bill 1962, which is pretty identical to my bill. But as you know, it's hard to get things passed these days, especially in the House. So the bill has not been, it has not made it out of committee, so it has not been called to the floor, and the bill on the Senate side has not either. So fortunately, there's another path, thank goodness. So through the United States Antiquities Act of 1906, the President has limited executive powers through this act, where he can protect America's treasures by establishing national parks and monuments. And it's not uncommon for presidents to use this act. In fact, it's been used about a dozen times by 14 different presidents, including President Clinton and George Bush. And I believe Dr. Jarvis shared with us today that President Obama has used the act also. But now I want to introduce you to someone who can provide you with more information about the Antiquities Act and the powers of the President, the Department of Interior, the National Park Service. And that person is Dr. John Jarvis, who is Director of the National Park Service under President Obama. And Dr. Jarvis has visited Pullman before, and we definitely welcome him back. And he is interested in the possibility of creating a national park, or he would not be here tonight. So he wants your thoughts, he wants to hear from you, he wants to listen to your thoughts. So as has already been said, please ask your questions, please share your thoughts. But before I hand over the mic to Dr. Jarvis, I want to thank all of you in this audience for all of your participation, all your pushing, and all your caring about Pullman, because everybody doesn't care as much as they should about their neighborhoods, but you guys definitely do, so I applaud you. You should applaud yourself. And another thing that I want to add, I do want to let you know, as far as your Metro station on 115th Street, that I am working with Metro to improve the parking in the area, because I got a lot of complaints about that. So I am working on that already. And what I would like us to do is give Dr. Jarvis a Pullman welcome, so he knows that you're glad to see him and you want him back and back and back.
That was a Pullman welcome. Thank you. Thank you. And, Congresswoman, Commissioner, Alderman, all the distinguished guests, but really the community. I could not be more welcome into your community and more proud, frankly, of the work that you have already done to preserve this place and this story, the multiple stories of the Pullman Porter site. This is my second trip here. I've had an opportunity to visit the neighborhood and walk around and hear the stories, talk to community members, and feel that this is a place that the National Park Service belongs. We feel that we are welcome here. So the Congresswoman explained that there are two ways to get here. To establish a new unit in the National Park System, to bring the National Park Service to be your partner, to be part of your community, to help tell this story. One is through Congress, and we greatly appreciate the Congresswoman's bill, the support from the Senate. It is bipartisan, but frankly, we have not seen a lot of movement on that. So there is an alternative path, and that is presidential power. And actually, it's been used a lot more than the Congresswoman indicated. Since 1906, 16 of the 19 presidents that have served have utilized the Antiquities Act 140 times since 1906. And in places that you might be surprised, like the Grand Canyon was set aside by the Antiquities Act. Devil's Tower, Mesa Verde, Chaco Canyon, many, many places across the nation that we view today as our crown jewels of the National Park System. President Obama has used it for the National Park Service 5 times since he came into office in 2009. And let me just click them off because I think you'll pick up on just a little bit of a trend. He first used it to establish Fort Monroe National Monument in Virginia on the Chesapeake Bay. Fort Monroe is famous because it was the place that the contraband decision was made. The commanding officer of the Union forces in Fort Monroe used his legal theory to protect 3 escaped slaves through the concept that he could confiscate them as contraband that might be used as property and the execution by the enemy, by the Confederates. Abraham Lincoln was so interested in this concept that he traveled down to Fort Monroe and spent a couple of days with Benjamin Butler, went back to Washington, and wrote the Emancipation Proclamation. Fort Monroe is an incredible addition to the National Park System. President Obama set aside the lands that comprised the farm where Harriet Tubman served as a slave and escaped and returned time and again to help other slaves escape to the north to freedom. President Obama set aside the home in Xenia, Ohio of Colonel Charles Young, the commanding officer of the Buffalo Soldiers, of the highest ranking African Americans in the history of those days who faced unyielding racism and yet still stood proud and led his troops. He set aside a national monument in Delaware, first state national monument, the first state to ratify the Constitution, to establish the rights that we all aspire to today. And he set aside Cesar Chavez National Monument in Keene, California, to recognize the incredible contributions of this man for peace, who took his acts in the way Gandhi did, but preserved the rights and the protection of the American farm workers as well. So if you think about this site, within that framework, the history of the Pullman Porter site, the Pullman Porters themselves that suffered racism, stood strong and tall above all of that, really began the development of the middle class for African Americans, honored education in their families, that they unionized and stood strong against injustice here as well. All of these pieces fit together into a story, into a narrative that we believe in the National Park Service needs to be told. The National Park Service has a mission that we represent the stories of all Americans, good and bad stories, so that we can learn and inspire the next generation to achieve those aspirations that were dictated in the Constitution for all of us. So, in order to do this, there's sort of three criteria. There's actually more than that. One of it is there anything still here? And there is, obviously, because you have stood up to protect it. So there is something here for the National Park Service to partner with all of you. But there are sort of three criteria. One is significance. I know we're not going to have a vote, but I'm going to ask you, do you believe that the Pullman Porter site is nationally significant? I can't hear you. I think we got that. Okay. The second question is suitability. Now that's kind of a bizarre question, but the question is, if you look at the National Park Service in total, what we currently manage, 401 national parks. I see some buckets out there around 402. I think I know what that means. We ask ourselves, within that inventory of 401 sites, do we have any place that we tell these stories already? Do we tell the story of labor struggles in this nation? No, we really don't have a place like that. Do we tell the stories of the struggles of the Pullman Porters, or the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, or how the first African American Union was formulated, or how a community rose up against injustices of a company town? We do not. So let me ask you the question, do you feel that the Pullman Porter site is suitable for the National Park Service? Yeah! The third question is feasibility. So feasibility is kind of a complicated question. One is sort of, is there still something there? I'd say yes. That's thanks to all of you that have worked so hard to keep this place alive in spite of the challenges that it has faced. Are there partners? Are there people that will help us tell this story so that we're not doing it alone? And certainly we've heard from the city, from the community, from the many nonprofits and partners, the historians, the agencies that represented here. So I think there are plenty of partners. And the last component of this is, what does the community think? Is the community supportive of the establishment of a Pullman Porter National Monument, National Historic Park? So let me ask you, is this Pullman Porter site feasible for the National Park System? Yeah!
Thank you, Director Jarvis. Those were inspiring words. I just want to say hello again. I'm Amy Martin. On behalf of the state of Illinois, I'd like to read the following statements. The state of Illinois strongly supports making this neighborhood a part of the national park system, and I'd like to explain why. Governor Pat Quinn has reviewed the proposal and believes it would benefit the state in 3 areas. First, it would help educate the public and school children about how important moments and issues in our nation's history. You've heard tonight about the Pullman Community marking a new step in urban planning. The 1894 Pullman strike was also a painful but important development in labor history. And of course, Pullman gave rise to the nation's first major African-American union. More people should know about these incredible stories, and connecting the neighborhood to the national park system would make that happen. Second, it would bring new resources to the important job of protecting our historic treasures. The National Park Service could provide new ideas and expertise for protecting this one-of-a-kind neighborhood. Its national status might lead to new partnerships, and the state of Illinois is preserving the factory complex and the Hotel Florence, and the city of Chicago and the people of this neighborhood are doing all they can in helping us in those efforts. But more assistance is always welcome. Finally, it would be a significant economic boost for this area. Putting the National Park Service logo on Pullman would be an official stamp on approval recognized by tourists everywhere. More people would visit, more businesses would benefit, and more jobs would be created for this area. Illinois attracted more than 105 million tourists last year, and they spent a combined $34 billion. We'd like Pullman to see a bigger part of that. One study estimates that after 10 years as part of the National Park System, Pullman would see over 300,000 visitors each year, creating over 350 jobs and producing an additional $40 million in economic impact. A national park designation has also been declared a priority project by the Millennium Reserve Steering Committee, which is dedicated to improving the Calumet region. As Governor Pat Quinn has said, Pullman is a tremendous economic engine, and it needs to be fueled by the National Park Service designation. It's also worth noting that Illinois has only one national park, believe it or not, the Lincoln Home National Historic Site in Springfield. We'd like to see the state benefit more from the tremendous work that the National Park Service does, and this would be a great way to do that. For all these reasons, Governor Pat Quinn and the state of Illinois endorse adding Pullman to the National Park System. It's been long. And now it's our chance to hear from all of you. I'd like to invite from all of you in the community, and I'd like to invite Sandra Washington, the Associate Regional Director for the National Park Service, up. Sandra, if you'd like to join me on stage. Sandra's going to help us ask any questions you might have in regards to this, and just talk about your opinions and if you have anything to say. We have microphones throughout the audience there. If people would like to step up, we'll get started. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. Good evening. And I think you've already found the microphones. There's one over here. Gentlemen, if you could raise your hand, he's at one mic, and there's another mic right there. If you feel so moved to share a comment or ask a question of anyone up here behind me, please come to the microphone. I'm going to ask that you be aware that there are hundreds of people in the room, and probably hundreds of people who'd like to speak. And so if you could contain your comments to 2 minutes, that would be very helpful. And with that, ask.
Hello, my name is Wendell Mosby. I'm the state director for the Young Elected Officials Network. And I have a statement here from Tony Taylor, president of the Massachusetts chapter of the A. Phillip Randolph Institute. He's stranded due to weather, so I was asked to read his statement. The A. Phillip Randolph Institute Mass chapter announced that it will join with the AFL-CIO and lend its full support to an initiative to have the A. Phillip Randolph Pullman Porter Museum named as a site in the proposed legislation Senate Bill 1962 to designate a national park in the Chicago-Pullman area. Accomplishing this goal will honor the African American contributions to labor in a much broader way in general, and A. Phillip Randolph and the Brotherhood of the Sleeping Car Porters in particular, in perpetuity. The effort is being spearheaded by, like I said, for Tony Taylor, president of the Mass chapter of the A. Phillip Randolph Institute. The good news is that the Illinois Historic Preservation Agency and the National Park Service is hosting this public meeting to discuss the possible options for including Chicago's Pullman neighborhood within the national park system, with the support of U.S. Senators Dick Durbin and Mark Kirk, as well as U.S. Representative Robin Kelly. If it is done the right way, the creation of a national park site will increase jobs, boost Pullman's economy as a result of adding tourism dollars, and most simultaneously benefiting the underserved population of the Pullman community. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Scott Marshall. I'm a former Pullman worker and an officer of the Steelworkers Union Retirees Organization. I just want to say that how important I think this whole project is in terms of labor history all the way through, and including to when Pullman shut down in these neighborhoods. Pullman shut down and quit making rail cars, became the last U.S. company to make passenger rail cars in the country in order to transfer their money to making oil rigs in the ocean. Was not a great decision by them. And our local union, Local 1834, the Eugene V. Debs local of the Steelworkers Union, fought like hell to stop them from closing these plants, and that should be a part of the history too, along with the rest of it. But this is just, like the director said, this labor history is not known far and wide and it needs to be. So let's do it. Thank you.
My name is Mike Shemansky, and I'm president of the Historic Pullman Foundation. The Historic Pullman Foundation strongly supports the efforts to establish Pullman as a unit of the National Park System. We have supported legislation to do so, and now we respectfully request President Obama to use his executive power in the Antiquities Act to designate Pullman as a national monument. The National Park at Pullman would culminate 5 decades of grassroots efforts to preserve and restore the Pullman Historic District's place in American history and to attract broader national and international attention to this important landmark site. A national park at Pullman will bring the expertise of the National Park Service to refine and enhance the many stories which are unique to Pullman. The Pullman Historic District is a great place associated with many significant ideas and challenges faced by our nation over the past 150 years, such as innovation, prosperity, growth, immigration, integration, recessions, depressions, conflict, and change. National historic parks and monuments are great places to commemorate, celebrate, and learn from our past and discuss our future as a nation. Pullman is a great place where people can come to a place to discuss issues and try to figure out where we are trying to go as a nation in the context of democracy, capitalism, and a world marketplace. Since 1973, the Historic Pullman Foundation has preserved landmarks and conducted educational programs in the form of exhibits, tours, lectures, and videos and publications. We look forward to working with the National Park Service and others in support of the National Park Service and its shared mission. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Paul Petratus. I'm a Chicago historian and lucky enough to be in the most exciting neighborhood in Chicago.